Berlin is, as you maybe have heard, we say that it is poor but sexy, which is great for creating art, is not that great as a slogan to sell art. So it's not like Berlin really has a massive group of collectors, just like London or New York, and is not really a destination for buying art in a fair.
Well, and this is what I started learning. Like, I had no idea. I'm a foreigner. I'm from America. I've lived in Middle East. I now live in Prague, and everybody keeps talking about Berlin, Berlin, Berlin. Oh, you need to go exhibit in Berlin. Oh, your market can be in Berlin. Blah blah blah. And now that I'm here in Berlin, everybody keeps going, yeah, Berlin is not anybody's market. It's great for producing art, so it's fabulous to be an artist here. There are lots of great opportunities for exhibiting here. But there's very, very little financial support beyond government grants and residencies and things like that as far as actual sales. This is not as robust a market as London, Paris, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, but then you can produce. For producing art, it is amazing because you're still in a big city. There's the excitement of it. But this is even a complaint from local galleries. Recently, Johann König from the König Gallery, he published an interview with, I think it was Die Welt. It was about 2-3 months ago. And one of his big comments was that the taxes are so high, not so high, but they're higher than in New York. So an artist that he represents that has a studio here, collectors might be buying New York. And he's
I heard this. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, why that's not how it's supposed to be. Like, so the artist is in Berlin, my gallery's here, but for the collector it's cheaper to buy in New York.
Yeah.
So
I've even heard that even around the EU as well, like Switzerland, and there's a particular one like Art Basel, no taxes there, so people would generally sort of wait or prepare to buy when they're at some Basel art fair kind of thing rather than buying at their local gallery.
Yes. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, but then you have to be aware that the kind of work that you're going to find is very different.
Well, also it seems there's like in transport taxes or some sort of tax that's paid for bringing work into Switzerland.
Okay. And yes, and then if you sell the work, you might recover.
Yeah, some sort of fee that you like. Yeah, I don't know anything about this stuff, and I assume you don't either, because you're not a gallery.
No, I'm not a gallerist, but I sometimes when I create, like right now, I'm working a show, and yeah, so that I'm helping with the transport as well, and the taxes side. Because at the same as well, so it's great. No one wants to, in the art world, we all wanna talk about their work. And then when we think about transport and taxes, it's quite boring. No one wants to talk about it.
Oh no, I want to talk about that. I mean seriously.
No.
That's the point of the podcast, is to talk about the things that people don't talk about.
Okay, cool.
That's what I want to talk about. We could talk about your philosophy and wax on poetically all you want, but that's not really what I want to learn or know or understand, because that's the stuff, quite honestly. You can do an interview with any magazine and they'll ask you these beautiful poetic sort of like, oh, what's your inspiration? How do you do all this other stuff? This podcast, the idea of this is basically, I'm from America. I was born and raised there, trained there. And then I moved to the Middle East and so I learned the different markets, and then I came to Europe and I thought, I was like, great, okay, I understand how the markets work. I know 2 continents. This is a 3rd continent. I should be able to do this well. And I got here and I realized I know nothing. The market is completely, now I don't know if it's my fault, because like the more I've been doing this podcast, I started learning. I went into academia, so I'm a professor, and I think by me moving myself out of the actual industry, I lost touch with all the changes and the growth and the evolution of the market, and I have absolutely no idea how it works now. I knew how it did work 30 years ago when I was trained.
Sure.
But it's so different now. Social media, even just the interconnectedness of the EU and the VATs and all the insurance and all these kinds of things that people didn't talk about even 20 years ago.
Yeah, but also the magnitude of the market has changed.
It has.
There's so much money in it, and there's also so much different tiers in the art world. Because if you think about the art world, there's the blue chip top-notch auction houses world.
And that's what everybody reads in the news and all this.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is what everybody thinks the art world is.
Yeah, definitely, which is not. It's just like the point of the iceberg, really. There's a lot of things interesting happening all the way down, but of course, it is very hard to grasp or hard to put everything in a box, because it's the same as saying, oh, what's the market for marble? The market for marble, it's probably, even though it's a very simple thing to point out, marble, but if you think about Italy, is different from the US, that is different from Brazil. I just mentioned marble because, for example, my partner, he's an interior designer in Italy, and he had a client who told me, oh, I want like polished cement all over my bathroom. And he said, oh, actually here, it is more expensive to have that than to have everything marble, because the quarries are all around there.
Interesting.
And for the cement work, you have to bring a guy from Milan because it is in the south of Italy.
Right.
And suddenly, something that is so like, oh, of course, marble is gonna be more expensive than cement.
Right.
Anywhere. But then when you start going into the details and location as well, that changes.
Yeah.
It's not. So if it is like that for marble, imagine for art.
Well, but is it like that for art? I mean, with the internet and all the sort of connectedness of stuff, like, can prices still vary, or is there sort of a necessity to be standardized because of the worldwide global nature of it all?
No, I don't think it's about being becoming a standard. It's more about being a shared culture. And artists, in my opinion, artists that can somehow touch on cultural points that are universal, or they can give messages that can be easily translated across the world. Maybe they have the chance to speak not only to a broader audience, but also develop bring narratives that are interesting across cultures. Yeah, but there's always ways to, you can keep going back and forth. But when we think about the high market, like the high end of the market, when Christie's when they were offering the Salvador Mundi, they didn't use the word Christ. They only described it as the male Mona Lisa. And that was because they were aiming for an audience that maybe is not Christian, that iconography does not directly speaks to them. So they decided...
And the people with the most money...
Yeah, maybe like they're targeting for international audience, because when we think about that kind of work, you only have about like 100 people really that would maybe bid. But then, so it's interesting, right? That's something that is so clearly, like from a Western perspective, such a clear way to describe the work, like Christ. They decided not to go through that route at all.
It's all the little games we play.
Well, yes, yeah. And then we can say that, or at the same time finding what is shared between all cultures, and saying that art being like a new religion almost, then you can say, it's funny that the male Mona Lisa is more powerful than Christ, or is a better selling point.
Well, yeah, it's got that commonality, or at least has the opportunity to be more approachable by a wider range of people if you get rid of some sort of a charged word, kind of like thing like Christ kind of thing. Because I mean, it would be the same thing if somebody said, I don't know, another big religion, Buddha. Like they called it the male Buddha kind of thing. But I mean, it would just have that, again, sort of stigma to it, both positive for some people and negative for other people.
Yeah, or just like, if not negative, but then you don't connect directly to it. But then, as a contrast, just so I don't forget.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is so just recently, I don't know if you made it to the Julie Stoschek collection here in Berlin, but she's presented this artist which is called Wang Shui, and is a collective, but they don't open up how many they are, where they're from. It's just the name of it, so there's no date of foundation. Because even with collectives, often it's so easy to find the list of the participants, who is part of them. But with them, they don't do any of that. And it's just interesting because in a way it is claiming a non-national, like they deliberately decide they don't want to be pointed down to a specific culture.
Well, and not even a gender or anything like this. I mean, any sort of the traditional pigeonholes that we place artists in, kind of thing.
Correct. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, actually, I want to skip back because generally I start the podcast, which we didn't do this time, but please pronounce your name correctly for me.
Well, I'll pronounce my name Brunno Silva, but Brunno is an easy name, like it's quite international, so I'm happy with any kind of Brunno in Italy or Brunno in France. So Brunno in Germany.
Brunno, okay.
Yeah.
And so I often will ask a lot about like a little bit about backgrounds, because I'm always interested, how do people come to the arts? Because it's not your standard life choices basically to go, yeah, I'm going to be an artist or work in the arts. So family, was your parents and siblings, or was it a teacher that got you to the arts, or some life experience? Like, how did you end up sort of coming down this path?
Yeah, so the romantic story is that when I was 7, I was in school and we were looking through a Caravaggio book, and my teacher told me, oh, you have to imagine that these paintings, they're basically life-sized. And in that moment I was like, okay, so I shouldn't be looking in a book. I want to be in the museum. I want to see it. And that for me was a moment where I decided not only to work in the arts, but also to at some point visit Europe, or maybe even live in Europe.
Where were you? You were
born? I was born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and I moved to Germany 7 years ago.
All right. And you were how old?
I'm 33.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the romantic story. And
very romantic.
And then when I was going to university, I wanted to study sociology. But then my parents were just concerned about career options.
I understand.
Yeah. And then I studied economics, but economics of culture institutions. And I wrote my thesis was about positive externalities of museums and how if you don't wear socks, you are fine if all socks producers close, because you don't use socks and you don't wear socks anyway. But museums, they are different. Even if you don't go to a museum, you still feel that museums are important. They play an important part on our culture. And that's because of positive externalities, and which is something very hard to grasp in economics, because it's something...
Pronounce that again.
Positive externalities.
Externalities.
I mean, that would be...
I've never heard that phrase before.
I mean, maybe in English there's other terms for it. That's like a straight up translation from Portuguese. But yeah, it's positive externalities. I can double check and let you know.
It's fine. I'm sure somebody will double check the podcast and they'll be sure to tell me.
Yeah, but the idea of it is you recognizing that something has a positive impact in society. For example, having a park. Instead of having another building. But
not only that, but it has a positive impact on society, even if you don't like it.
Exactly.
Or engage with it or use it or whatever it is. Like,
exactly.
I mean, I can sit here and say like, oh yeah, I love all the little pocket parks, like little neighborhood parks all around Berlin. Now, I have not gone and sat in any of these little pocket parks throughout Berlin, but I appreciate that they're there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the idea.
Yeah. I've never heard anybody say museums, we don't need them. I've heard people say museums, we shouldn't give them so much money, but nobody says, I don't think they should be there.
Yeah, correct. And there are people who, they might not even go to museums, but
right.
They still recognize the importance of them.
Absolutely.
So that was when I studied. And then after that, I moved to Europe. And since then, so I came to Berlin, working with other things. And then after 3 years, I decided to go to London to study art history, and did my master's also in art business. All of it.
That's good.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was all at Sotheby's Institute.
Interesting. You're the second person I've spoken to who actually took some classes there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, they offer like a full range of courses. I was there for 2 years with the master's in the art history, which was really great. I mean, London is a wonderful place to learn about art and contemporary art.
Absolutely.
And since then, I came back to Berlin. Yeah.
So, okay, so with all this training and all this background, why out of all the potential things within the art world, did you choose curator?
Well, I am a curator and art consultant.
Define art consultant exactly.
I just help people buy art. That's the easiest definition.
Right.
And basically as an art consultant, I help collectors to not only understand maybe what they collect and help them buy what they want, but contextualizing their collection within a broader art world and showing them other works that they might be interested in. And overall, so there's education is a big part of it, and also prices. So how much is this a good price for this kind of work? Yes or no? Or maybe you have something that is in the range of 50,000, but then you want something that is a little bit smaller, but it still has a narrative. Is it still part of the same, not body of work, but the same feeling to it, if you like? And I just help them to navigate like these details of the art world.
Okay, I'm fascinated by this because to me you're this sort of random unicorn. Because well, like a gallerist, I can go to a gallery and I can see, hey, a gallerist is the person sitting behind that table right there.
Yeah.
I can see an artist. I can go to a studio. The person in the studio making, that's an artist. You all, these consultant curators, you blend in, you're camouflaged. Like, we can't pick you out of a crowd. Like,
Yeah.
So like to be able to find one of you all and be able to say, like, actually ask you questions, it's incredibly difficult because we don't know how to find you a lot of times because there's not like a database. I mean, there are some databases, but they're not like, it's not as obvious. Let's say you all are a little bit more behind the scenes, much like collectors. Collectors are very hard to get in touch with because a lot of them, quite honestly, don't want people to know they collect.
Sure.
So you're in that same realm. To me, as a professor and as an artist, you're this like camouflaged person that could be wandering around the streets and we never know who you are.
Yes. And as an art consultant and as a curator, I like working with young artists because I find that, if you look back in art history, everyone that made the mark was because they were working with their contemporaries and creating networks. And as a consultant, I'm working with such a high point of the market that I don't really have the chance to engage deeply with the artists.
All right. So my big question, how do you find, so for both of these roles, so like curator, how do you find new, young, quality artists? As a consultant, I'm probably more interested in how do you find clients?
Well, that's that's a very good question.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. No, it's definitely is not that easy. Okay, so as a curator, I find artists really through friends and friends of friends. And I do visit some project spaces, but to be very honest with you, the most artists that I work with are artists that somehow we create a kind of friendship.
Right.
Or they have come through like a friend. So if I'm creating a group show, so for example, I just did a show that was only video art, and then we had 23 artists, which was great. It was like the biggest show that I ever put together. And some of them did come from friends. So once I would share, okay, this is the show that I'm working on, this is the proposal, and they will tell me.
Okay, and I love that, but this is the issue I have. Okay, keep in mind, I'm a professor, I run a podcast, I do all these things, but I'm also a practicing artist. Okay, so I'm sitting there and I'm sitting in my studio, I'm making some work, I think it's really good. I go out and I see an exhibition. So let's say I make video art, which I don't, but let's say I make video art, and then I show up and I see your exhibition that you have curated, and it's all these video artists, and I'm like, why didn't you choose me? How can people get in front of the curators to participate in these exhibitions? Because it feels like it's this little sort of almost like a Venn diagram, like a sort of a closed loop of you and your friends. But how can somebody who's not in that group sort of get into that group?
I mean, but it's hard, isn't it? Because, for example, for this one, I did share
hard
on my social media, and I said, okay, this is a very soft open call, because I'm not going to do open call for a show that has very little funding and the artists are not being paid. So I wouldn't reach out to an artist that I think that is very talented, that I would love to include in the show, to propose a show that he's not going to have anything out of it, really.
Right. I understand.
So then when you're doing with your friends, it's very easy to have that communication. Like, okay, you want to be part of this? Great. If you don't want, that's fine as well. Some of them came up with like new pieces, which was something that I was not expecting from them. But then I did want to reach out as much as I could through like this soft open call. And at the same time, I didn't want to do like, oh, please send a proposal. It was just like, write me an email, say whatever you want, send me the links. Very uncomplicated, because no one is making tons of money with this. So let's just keep simple. And maybe I think that's one of the issues, isn't it? How would you... So yeah, I wouldn't reach out to an artist that I don't know, simply because I find that I would do that if I had a budget, if I really was a more structured kind of exhibition. So so answering your question, it is really through your network, but also reaching out to projects that and spaces that you think that are good for you, that you feel that your work talks to.
Well, which then leads to the next question, like, does that actually work? Like, I mean, I've had conversations with gallerists, which is different than curators, very different. But galleries generally say submitting portfolios and stuff just generally doesn't work, because it's generally friends and connections and recommendations and all this that really are the way that people respect you and give you the opportunities.
And also CVs. And
I'm interested in that. Okay, so CVs. When you see okay. I come from academia, and in academia, they love the CVs. They're all about the CVs, but they like the big 10-page CV that lists every single thing you've ever done in your entire career. As a curator, is that what you want to see?
No. As a curator, for me, when I said that, I said more about the galleries.
Oh, yeah.
But if I'm creating a show for a gallery, so for example, now I'm working on an exhibition that's going to open at the end of November. And the CV, it is important not only because it then becomes a dialogue. You know, what's the next step for the artist, rather than, especially when it's like a middle. Because I know the business of galleries is becoming more and more difficult. So for a gallery, maybe it might be interesting to show an artist that is from Brazil, and it already has a solid market there, but haven't had a show in Europe. Rather than grabbing someone that just left university and has no history, that have not been granted any prize or have never been in a residency. So so that also comes into play.
So you are looking for like a good, strong track record of a history of exhibiting, potentially selling, etc., that kind of stuff.
I can see that the gallery would look at that, and also collectors. So collectors, they most of them, they are not for them the market sort of starts in the gallery, but for the gallery they have to somehow select the artists, you know? And also there's such a massive range of artists working out there. There are more active artists in New York alone than it was in Italy during the Renaissance. So
I believe that. Well, but it also, I believe that people are being very liberal with the word artist these days.
Yeah, well, good, and actually that's good.
Well, and there are more mediums as well too. That's another thing too. Back then, it was just pretty much sculpture, marble sculpture, and painting.
Yeah, and I wonder if there was like a conceptual Renaissance artist that just everyone ignored and then he died out.
And then they burned his work, so we don't know about it.
Yeah, but
the heretic.
Yeah. But what was I saying? Yeah, so of course the CV is always important, because people will check who did you study with, all that thing.
Really? Now, is that important? Who you studied with?
Well, I think it can be if it is relevant. If it is not, you just move forward. But
yeah, like I don't put any sort of who I studied with on my CV, but that's because my school, I studied with like there were three different sort of primary professors, and I didn't study with any one of them. I studied with all of them. So that I couldn't put all three, because that would look like I didn't actually study with any one, but I couldn't really say any one of them was super influential on me. But here in Europe, it is very important. They very much emphasize the lineage of your education, your mentor. Like, this is a very important part of your CV and your training and your reputation.
Yeah, and if you have something there, everyone uses it. So, for example, Douglas Gordon, who is like a tremendous artist, he studied with Susan Hiller, and she actually was the one who told him to experiment with video art. It's just it's just like a nice footnote. Even with an artist that is as big as Douglas Gordon, that's still quite kind of like a good entrance, like not suggestion, but it's a good way of talking about his work. Just making that little nod to where he studied. Or like Sean Scully, who spent some time in New York, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, I think that at the end, all of this comes together, and all of it definitely influence somehow in the price, but also which galleries are going to represent you, or what kind of shows do you going to be invited to be part of.
What about artist statements? How do you feel about them? How important are they?
The artist writing about his own, I think they can be good. They can. There's a show up now, Kalegebawa, and there's a text by the artist, which is nice. No, I'm sorry. I don't mean like that. I think it's a great thing to. It can be a great thing to have as long as there is a purpose to it.
Well, these days it's a necessary evil as an artist. So as a producer of art, we for grants, for residencies, and then theoretically for even submitting portfolios, like along with my portfolio of work, or even in building your website. When you build a website, you have to do search engine optimization, which means you need text, and you need a statement to go with it in order for search engines to even find your work and find what you do. So, I mean, you could even expand that into like hashtags on Instagram and all these other ways that the texts are almost necessary these days.
Yeah, my negativity towards it is just because I find that it's hard for an artist. When you talk about your own work, you definitely need to make a certain decision making of which themes do you want to brought it up. And when it's a third person writing, then that's fine because that's their view on your work. When it's you doing it, that can be problem. I find that a little bit problematic. So imagine that you write a statement that is all about the aesthetics of the work. Suddenly you close the whole door on maybe the politics of the work. Just because you didn't bring it up doesn't mean that it's not there. But once it's like an artist statement, I find it very conclusive. Almost.
Okay, so if I'm a practicing artist, so I mean, I'm just using myself as a proxy for everybody listening to this. So somebody who's a practicing artist, should I write my own artist statement, or should I basically sort of get a curator to write or assist me in writing, or whatever you want to phrase it, in a statement to accompany my work?
I don't know. It really depends. Also depends on the kind of work that you're showing. If you find, and that's for everyone, if you're an artist, get 5 artists that you really admire that are active now and look at their website. Some of them don't even have websites.
I know this. And some of them have websites that have no text at all. Like they just have their name and an email address or a name and a phone number, and that's it, and 0 text.
Exactly. And if you ask me, as a young artist or an artist that is not represented yet, if you tell me, should I spend time writing proposals for biennials or should I write text for my website? I will tell you, spend that time writing applications for biennials and open calls, because you're going to get so much more out of that. If you have Venice Biennale on your CV, it is better than 5,000 words on your website.
Sure. Okay. That's great recommendation.
But that's also my opinion, doesn't...
This entire podcast is your opinion. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So, but it's a good recommendation, basically. So it's like, if the choice was spend time, money, energy, effort, whatever, on a marketing tool, like let's say social media or a website or something like that, versus putting something in that could give you sort of a leg up in your career, such as a grant, a residency, or a proposal for an exhibition or anything like this, really artists should be spending more of their time on the latter.
I believe so, yes. Unless the first comes very naturally for you. So the Instagram thing, I find it quite impersonal and to like just the imagery of the work, but for some young artists it works really well because they're fluent in that language.
It does feel like sometimes it's a different language. I mean, I'm 46 years old, so like to me I'm still learning this language of how to use these social medias effectively.
Yeah, but at the same time, you don't have to. For example, Asia is I'm saying as my personal experience. Asia is a very important market. There's great collectors there,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't speak the language, and I also don't speak the culture. So could I put the 10,000 hours in and become a specialist? I could. Do I want to? Maybe not, because I already make the leap from Brazilian, South American culture to European, German, Italian, and English culture. And I might just stay on that area, because if I also try to reach out too much, then you spread yourself too thin.
Which is another good advice, basically. Like, don't spread yourself too thin.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I often tell people in my students is basically specialize, become a master in something, choose a thing and be the master of that thing.
Yes, definitely. And also for artists is, if you have an idea and you do your first body of work on that idea, keep doing it, because it needs time to sink in and to mature.
It's funny. I actually was talking with a consultant at one point in the United States about the career trajectory of an artist. Basically, you should not. Some artists believe like you do a series, and when you're done with that series, you then basically pick up and do a completely different topic, a different thing, and you do a completely different series. But what she expressed to me is that curators, galleries, collectors, etc. are even if your individual series are very unique, that they should still have a common thread through the entire career that basically shows growth and learning of an idea or a concept over the span of a career, instead of jumping around between idea and idea.
I can find examples of both ways.
Yeah, sure. Gerhard Richter. I mean, we all know these things.
Yeah, or Bruce Nauman.
Yeah.
Bruce Nauman is a wonderful artist, because it's always a joy to see it.
But they're these random unicorns. I mean, these are utterly unique people that can pull that kind of thing off. I mean, but that's not the norm, is it? To just pick up different mediums and different ideas and work completely differently every couple years.
I think inevitably, if you're very truthful to your own practice, that will come through naturally. So, for example, Damien Hirst, he now just opened a show with his new mandala pieces and with the butterfly wings. Is that different from the shark? Definitely, but it's still dealing with themes, like, very universal themes of death.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's a
and
common thread that you can see the growth throughout the career, but it's not. Basically, what I'm saying is, like, you don't start off with working in death and then suddenly jump to working with politics and then suddenly work with religion. I mean, so like you do have to have a commonality through your career, basically. Am I wrong? I mean, the podcast is based in the whole fact that I believe I'm wrong about most things.
No. I agree with you, but I find that this is not. That's just a natural consequence by the fact that you are an artist and you are creating all the works yourself or the concepts of them. So this will inevitably come through somehow. Like I heard people turning to me and say, "Oh, you create this show, it's very colorful. It's because you're Brazilian." Like, wow, I am Brazilian, and it is a very warm, colorful country. But then a lot of people that have lived in cold countries use color. So but inevitably people will put those things together, even with me as a curator. But I wouldn't say to an artist that overthink that. I would say, think about your series, think about new ideas, and that the rest is just a consequence. Because we have brilliant artists who found like one thing that they do really well and they just kept doing it. Like on Kawada, for example, he made his own practice based on that one idea, and that worked.
But a lot of people also might fall into the trap of, like, if they feel like they need to be doing one idea, that they don't evolve and they don't grow and they don't get basically what better. I mean, I guess whatever word you want to put to it, but don't grow. I mean, because you have to continue to be evolving throughout your career. You can't literally just like find something that you do really well and just to keep doing that exact same thing your entire career. You have to.
Unless that becomes in itself, this, like with Kawada, that was his statement.
Yeah, would be horribly ironic, yes.
Yeah, or Rachel Whiteread.
I do not know these people.
Okay.
So it's okay, but I'm sure the listeners will know them, or they'll look them up and they'll be marvelous.
Yeah, so Rachel, for example, what she does is that she casts houses inside out, basically. And she kept doing that for like to this day, but with change of materials, change of objects. But anyway, she found her niche, and conceptually is still interesting for her. So you can see it has to be genuine and both ways if you decide to do something completely different as well. For example, Brunno is one of my favorite artists, and I love going to when he's a solo show because it doesn't feel like a solo show when you have Bruce. And his editions are also wonderful works. Yeah, I think it has to be genuine, and if it is genuine, then the message will come through. But the market does love some consistency, of course.
That's what I'm getting at. Well, and I wonder about that because people say like, oh, it's becoming a global market. But I'm getting the sense through these conversations that while this is my theory that I've come up with, it is a global market. Of course, nobody can see me with doing my hand gestures here, but I'm making a really big circle. So the global market, but it's not really global. What it is it's a series of smaller markets, regional, local, whatever markets that are overlapping like a Venn diagram, and through the overlap of the regionals it feels big, but really it's not like one single market. It's a series of smaller markets that just happen to overlap more than they have in the past. That's my theory.
Yes, which is art is a representation of culture, and we do have now a global culture, but that's for very few. So we can say, are we becoming global as human beings? Oh, yes. If you are rich and you have a house in Miami, one in Paris, and you are originally from Russia, you can claim that you are international. You know, once a year you fly to the Armory Show in New York, and then you go to Freeze in London, and then you made some time to go to Copacabana for New Year's Eve in a yacht. Are you an international person? Yes, you are.
Absolutely.
Is that the reality for most people?
No.
No, it's not.
No, I mean, most Americans don't even have passports. They've never even left the country.
There you go. But then if I open a magazine, you know, what they are talking about, like those lifestyle magazines, they're not going to talk about the guy who doesn't have a passport and where he goes for his coffee. They will talk about this global trotter that it is now in a yacht in Rio. Yeah, so it's just not that easy. There is a global market, yes. There is global artists and global collectors, yes. But we cannot foreshadow the importance of local scenes.
Right.
So, for example, I have a very good friend who also has a podcast in Copenhagen.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the podcast? Go ahead.
So the podcast is called Contemporary Culture Copenhagen.
Okay.
And my friend Brandon, he actually started it because we studied together at Sotheby's, and then he moved to Copenhagen and he wanted to unravel the art world.
Sounds familiar.
And he decided that, maybe doing a podcast is a way to get to talk to the right people, but in a casual way, so it's not too much pressure. And he just really wanted to learn. And he had been doing quite well with that. Yeah.
Yeah. How long has it been around?
About 2 years now.
Okay, he's way ahead of me then. All right.
And when did you start?
6 weeks ago.
6 weeks ago. Wow. Wait. But yeah, okay, September. Yeah, because you have a lot of posts already.
I'm a busy boy.
Okay.
Yeah, we're currently doing 2 a week.
Okay.
As far as putting them out, because quite honestly, I have the time and I can get around to talk to people. So I have a very, it sounds bad, but like I have a very leisurely lifestyle. All my jobs, every job I have is online.
Okay.
So I can easily travel. I can easily take a day off here and do a bunch of podcasts because I can just make up the work tomorrow because it's all online.
Of course.
So yeah, I have a bit of a unstructured life, which lends well to being able to do this.
That was great. Yeah, that was very good. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So Copenhagen, it has a very... I haven't spent too much time there, but as far as I understood, it is very... The galleries heavily sell work to locals. And the locals, they're not particularly collectors. They're not buying all the time. But they do save up. And once a year, they go to a show and they find something that they really love. And that's their like the present to themselves. So they are collectors, but on a more smaller personal scale.
Interesting.
But the galleries, they do heavily relate on this kind of purchases to carry on with the program. Or if we think about Brazil, the market is very close, because the local galleries represented local artists selling to local collectors.
Well, and I've often wondered about that, because when people talk about art markets, we hear stuff like these days, we hear Asia, Europe, America, Canada, even little bit of Africa now is starting, but I hear nothing about South America, like nothing on the international market. But I just don't hear the conversations going on there. I'm quite certain there is a robust market there, but it doesn't feel like it's expanded as quickly or as efficiently as some of the other markets.
Because it's a very self-contained market.
Okay.
And oddly enough, we don't have a lot of publications in Brazil, which is a shame, and I hope change in the near future. So it becomes a very closed art scene, which is basically impossible to, you have to be there, you have to speak the language, and then you start to discover what's happening. But we do have like big galleries. So for example, Men's Wood, they are international gallery now, or Fortes Daiola is also a very recognizable gallery, showing at Frieze, all the big art fairs, they're always there. And the Brazilian, especially the Brazilian art scene, so it's not Latin America as a whole, but in Brazil has a very respected modern contemporary art scene, because we do have the second oldest biennial in the world. Only Venice is older than us.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the art fair, of course, SP-Arte is the biggest art fair in Latin America. So there's a lot of things happening. I know, and galleries like Lee Song show there. Neugarim Schneider, who is a German gallery, they also show there. David Zinner, they show in São Paulo.
Okay.
So they do have a certain, they know that there are collections there. They know that is an interesting market. But yeah, it's quite isolated. If you think about the Western world.
Okay, good. So it's not just me. Like it's actually kind of true.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna get back to a little bit more about like you and your career and your job and all this. So like, for lack of a better way of explaining it, let's sort of spell out, what is a curator doing for those people who may not fully grasp the nature of the profession?
Well, to me, a curator is a facilitator between the artwork and the public. So the artists, they are creating these pieces that don't particularly need to... I hope that the artist is much more worried about creating the work rather than what's going to be the read of the work or what people are going to be thinking, how people will engage with the piece. And then the curator comes in to help the dialogue to happen, or to contextualize the work with other artists, and also with ideas or philosophies or social debate that might be happening at a given moment. So I think that's my job, is to contextualize.
Okay, it's a necessary job, because a lot of artists, we sit around our studios and quite honestly, we're a little crazy oftentimes. We're a little off in some whatever world or thing, and we have a very difficult time explaining our work or contextualizing it for the bigger market, or any market for that matter. I mean, there's so many artists that have works that they've produced and they're just sitting in their studio and they just never see the light of day, because their personality just is not maybe social enough or eloquent enough to sort of get out and convince people or whatever to appreciate what they do. It's unfortunate, but true.
Yeah, and I think that all artists out there just invite a lot of people to come to your studio to do a studio visit.
Well, see, and that's fascinating to me, because I'm an oddity in this whole scenario, because I was trained as a photographer. So I never understood the idea of studio visits, because I was a photographer. I had a photo studio, not a place where I physically produce something like a sculpture studio or a painting studio or something like this. Now, this has changed. Now that I'm here in Europe, I actually have a true sort of atelier where I actually am working in there, constructing works and things like this. And so this idea of studio visits, this this is something that the responsibility falls on the artist to request from a curator or a gallerist kind of thing. So it's our duty to and responsibility to ask for these things.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Okay, great.
Definitely, because we can think, and going back to how you get representation or how do you get connected with people, it is almost like dating. So you never go on a date and say, look how gorgeous I am, look how great it is, the things that I do. You always go for an exchange and also giving the person something. So if you turn to, let's say, a gallerist and say, oh, can you please give me a show? That's quite, it doesn't really work.
Right.
But if you turn to them and say, oh, I really admire your program. I really admire artists A, B, and C that you represent. I value your opinion because I read some interviews with you. And I would love if you could come and just visit me in the studio because I really value your opinion. And even if you have to schedule for that 3 months because I know you're very busy, I'm more than happy to do so. I just would love you to come to my studio at some point and listen to what you have to say. And then suddenly you already, in my opinion, you already put a lot of walls down and you are giving them like a huge compliment, like your opinion matters.
The bottom line of what you're saying is that artists need to take responsibility and do the research. So you can't just walk up even to a curator and blindly just go, hi, you're a curator. Could you put my piece in your next exhibition? I mean, I should do research. I should look into your previous exhibitions. I should read maybe some of the things that you've written to accompany exhibitions and make a decision of whether I believe you will like my work, much like a dating thing. Like, I'm not going to go up to somebody who I just think like, oh, this person's going to hate me, but I'm going to talk to them anyways because they might benefit my career.
Yeah, or if you see someone that like, oh, I don't like what he's doing, but it's a nice gallery in a nice street, so I'd like them to show me.
Yeah, I don't like this curator as a person, but fuck, he's really, he's got it all going on and he can get me into XYZ exhibition. That's not what it is. Like,
that's not going to work.
Yeah, you can't be in the art world and use people.
No, because then it's not genuine and then it's boring. I mean, I think boring is so blunt of a word.
But not just that, but people don't appreciate it.
Nobody... And you won't appreciate it. Do you really want to work with a curator that you don't believe in?
Well, and as a curator, do you enjoy being used?
No. I mean, if they're paying it. But and it's a bit...
but that's not being used. That's a fair relationship.
No, and basically. Also even if they pay, so even if and that's when it starts to become like the history of yourself.
Well,
so
that becomes less of a relationship, like you're saying, like a dating thing, and more of a business relationship, which is very different.
It is, but in the art world, everything is much more a relationship than it is business. So, for example, I have my curatorial practice, and I do the things that I want to do the way that I want to do them. If tomorrow an artist tells me, oh, I'm going to pay you, X amount to create a show for me, but then I I don't like the work, I cannot do it. Sure. Because then even if I decide to do it for the money, which let's face it as well, that's very hypothetical. No one has money laying around to pay.
No artist has money laying around to pay a curator. Unless they got a grant. A grant could do that.
True. But then if you're working with someone that you don't believe in, it's just not going to flow. And then you're going to, it's sort of like almost embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, well,
but
also,
like dating.
Well, see, like I go back to like when I was a kid and everything, my teachers used to say, your reputation is everything.
Yes, definitely.
Everything. So, I mean, obviously there are things like you're only as good as your most recent show and all those kinds of jazzes. But like literally, like if you get a reputation in the art market for doing curating for pay, even when you don't actually like the artist, like your curatorial reputation is going to be diminished.
Exactly. Yeah. And because the art market is it is unregulated, reputation, it is very, very important. So, in all levels, you don't want to be an artist that is paying to have a show in a gallery. No one wants that.
I've never even heard. That's just absurd. I mean, the fact that artists are some of the people who have the least amount of money in the entire arts industry. Why would you charge artists for anything? Because they're the ones that are actually making the products that everybody else is making money off of.
Yeah, but what does happen more, not commonly, but There are a lot of galleries that might say, "Oh, I can give you a show." Smaller galleries or project spaces even,
Yeah.
and they might say, "I'm more than happy showing your work, but I don't have funding. So, can you transport the works here? Can you get the works here?" And by itself, that's already stops so much interchange to happen. And I'm mentioning this because when we were speaking before about how the international the art world is, well, it is, but at the same time, I know a lot of talented artists that I met when I was in San Diego that I would love to show here in Berlin, but there is a huge impediment because of transport costs.
Oh my God. But not even just that, customs, trying to get through customs.
Yeah.
Holy crap. One time I had an exhibition in Cuba before Cuba became open. So this is 20 years ago when it was still very closed. My artwork went to Cuba, and then the artwork came back. No problems. Customs didn't have an issue with it. For the next 10 years, every year, at the same time of year, I would get a 30-page document from the federal whatever of customs, basically questioning me about my trip to Cuba.
Wow.
And I'm like, I didn't go to Cuba. My artwork went to Cuba. I didn't go to Cuba. But they did this for like 10 years. I had to fill out the exact same paperwork for 10 years, every year. And I'm just like, and I'm always answering like, I didn't go to Cuba. My artwork went and came back, because they just saw the card for the exhibition and they just wrote all our names down and like, this was so stupid. But anyways, yes, customs is a bitch. I mean, I've had art, like as a photographer, I've shipped artwork from outside the United States into the United States, and customs wouldn't let it through to the point that they destroyed it.
Oh my God. Don't even say that. I have a show open in November with works coming from Brazil. So,
well, no, I think Europe's different. But I'm saying it was from the United Arab Emirates going to the United States and trying to get into the United States.
Okay, yeah,
it got caught in customs and stayed there for 3 months. It got to the point where I ended up, it was easier and cheaper for me to just buy a plane ticket and put my artwork in my luggage and fly there and then do the exhibition and then put it back in my luggage and fly back. And I did all that for less money than the amount of money customs tried to charge me.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, there are some artists that it's easier to just travel and do the work where the gallery is.
But that system is ridiculous. Like the fact that had to happen is just insane. But that's neither.
Yeah, but also authorities, they think that the art world is, everything is in the high level. Everything is with a lot of money.
And everything is an antique that's being smuggled and a forgery and a whatever. And it's like, ugh.
When we are talking about, inviting people to come to your studio, do studio visits, this is how everything starts. Because I do a lot of I would say I try to see every artist that invites me for a studio visit.
Wow. Even if their work looks like absolute crap, you'll
but
still
what is
visit?
Crap work? That's also so...
Totally subjective.
Exactly.
I know this.
And I'm not in a position where I can afford to not like a work in a way. I see that I try to be as open as possible. Because the moment that you think that you figured everything out, that's the moment when you are stuck in a box, and then everything that is not fitting on the concepts that you have will be a bad work.
Well, but it's also possible, like a lot of artists I find, the works that they submit to whatever or put out into the world are quite honestly actually not their best works. Like sometimes they actually have better work or more interesting work or more interesting potential works that they're doing in their studio that they either don't or haven't presented to the world. So sometimes the artist makes the wrong decision basically in their own editing process, and the ones that they put out for people to see are quite honestly not their best. Because we're very emotionally attached to them, so we have our we're very engaged in our work. We feel like this is our best, but in reality, like it's not our job necessarily to know that. That's your job to know. Yeah.
Or sometimes you want to bounce some ideas about the work or ideas about series that you have to develop there. Just talking to someone helps. Just sitting with someone and showing the work and talking about it, it can help a lot.
But see, I feel like I'm an artist, and I feel like if I invited a curator over, that I'm more or less like, I feel like I'm wasting their time. Like, I mean, you should be paid for your time and energy and money, or time and energy. And I feel like I'm wasting your time, like bringing you over to my studio because I'm not paying you to be there.
No, but you're inviting them as a thinker. I think it's a big compliment to say to someone that, I would love to know your opinion. And you're just asking for 2 hours of their time.
Well, I get people asking me that kind of stuff all the time, but I can't give them all my time. I mean, I do have to earn a living. My wife, we need money.
Of course. I'm just saying that you can try. I'm not saying that they have to give you that time. But I think if you ask for a gallerist, represent me, or give me 1 hour of your day to come to my studio, I would love you to see I would love to talk to you about my work. I think that they will be more willing to give you 1 hour of their time, especially if you're someone that showed appreciation and showed, I really like how you see the work by A, B, and C.
Again, yeah, research. Like, don't just scattershot ask anybody who has the name Curator on their name or gallerist, gallery behind their company name. Like, target your thing to fewer people who actually are relevant to whatever you're doing.
Exactly. And again, just like dating. So if you're dating someone, you want to find out maybe what do they do for a living and learn a little bit about that area.
Stalk them a little bit before going out.
But yeah, it's just how you do it. It cannot only be about you. And once people love compliments and people love to be right. So if you tell them that, you are such, and then it's also, it's not about faking it. You truly have to believe that what they are doing is good, and that you really truly value their opinion, and take their opinion. So if you get the galleries there and he tells you, this series, I respond to this series, do more work on that series, and then go back to them after a couple of months and say, so remember, I did more work about that series, and maybe that builds up to a relationship.
Which actually lends to an interesting question, because this has come up in my career, but I'm also hearing it in the podcast a lot. There seems to be it's a vocabulary word, but it's also a thought pattern here, which is commercial work versus fine art work. I'm not sure what the opposite was, but the term like commercial work or commercial gallery seems to be almost a bad word. It's basically like a gallery or an artist who is focused on selling versus focused on building careers and being a professional, getting into institutions and these kinds of things. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because I find fine art a worse word than commercial
art,
because fine art is just putting this pedestal of, it's fine art. It's art, period.
But we all love being on a pedestal.
Well, pedestals are overestimated. So I personally, I don't like the word fine art.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it's art, is contemporary art. I prefer talking about works in that sense. Commercial, I wouldn't use very often. I would use commercial gallery, but not as a bad term. I use it as, this is a gallery, is a commercial gallery. It's not a gallery as public funded. It's not a project space. It's not a museum. Mm-hmm. It is a commercial gallery. So they are...
Right, because like in my mind, growing up, when I heard the word commercial gallery, it meant a gallery that sold artwork. So like they sell. A non-commercial gallery would be a gallery that basically doesn't sell very much, like a project space or a nonprofit or an NGO or anything like this. Like that's a non-commercial gallery to me.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah. So like it's literally like a little nuance of vocabulary, like kind of thing. Like commercial gallery simply means they actually sell their artists' art.
Yeah, for me, commercial gallery is a gallery that is ready to sell the work.
Well, they're more focused on that, like that. They're more sort of just churning through selling art versus putting on amazing exhibitions that may never sell a single piece. Like
no, I think as long as it is private funded and it is ready to sell, if they are showing work that is not particularly domestic, they are still a commercial gallery.
Okay.
So, for example, Victoria Miro in London, they are known for selling mostly to institutions, but they are a commercial gallery.
Right, because they're still selling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or for example, Marlborough Gallery. The last time I was in their Chelsea space, they had our artwork. There was a smell, and there was a smell of money.
Neat.
But that was to be sold. You could buy an edition of that smell.
So you smell like money.
Yes, which is still commercial. Is a commercial gallery.
Interesting.
In contrast with Serpentine Gallery, which is public funded, non-commercial, fully you cannot buy the works, but it's not a museum. It is a smaller space where you can show art.
Okay, along that line, years ago, again, like I'm always comparing like when I was being trained in the arts versus what's going on now, because that's the thing that I don't understand. What's changed? Years ago, and even up until I started this podcast, curators, I put on this very high pedestal. They sat in their ivory tower. They were in like you don't question them. They are the absolute pinnacle of the arts industry, because they were the ones that decided who got into galleries. They were the ones who decided who got into museums. Like these were the gatekeepers of the magical kingdom for artists.
Yes.
Now, recently I've heard that there's a trend that commercial galleries, so we'll use your vocabulary on this, commercial galleries are hiring curators to curate the exhibitions and offering them percentage of sales instead of a salary or a stipend or whatever. Is that true?
Oh, that can happen. There's a way of being...
But see, to me, that taints the purity of the curator. Because now the curator is focused on, well, I'm going to choose to exhibit these pieces because I believe they'll sell better, rather than they're the best work by the artist.
No, because then it's only... I think it depends more on the gallery, because maybe the gallery gives you enough freedom that you can do whatever you want to do, and they are actually what they might be looking for. I think that the commercial gallery, it is a great space to experiment with new work or bringing up projects that maybe and of course, again, we are talking about the very high end of the market, because if you are a small gallery, hiring a curator or not doesn't make a big impact.
Right.
But for a bigger gallery, when they decide to engage with a curator, they're going to probably bring artists that might have had shows in biennials or big project or big museums even. But then the gallery becomes a space for experimentation. So for example, it's not a curated show, but the Ai Weiwei exhibition that just opened here, they are wonderful pieces, and some of them are quite small, and it's the kind of work that if it is in a museum, you might overlooked, or you might have one of that series, while in the gallery, you have that new body of work all laying down in front of you. So they have about 5 or 6 pieces. And moving forward, we might see them in institutions, but we're going to see maybe 1, 2, not of the 6 of them.
Right.
So the way that the commercial gallery becomes then a space for a new body of work to being shown in a very unique way. And for viewers, it lets you get really close to the artwork as well. Something that you wouldn't be able to in a museum.
Right. But my question really is about the being paid a flat fee as a curator, so that therefore it's not about the selling. So that's the part that.
But to me, it's the same.
Because
because even if it is a flat fee, the flat fee still is the calculation that the gallery is going to do based on the projections of the sales.
Right. But, I mean, what happens if you do curatorial work and there are no sales, but you took a percentage?
Yeah, then you're not going to make any money.
Yeah, I mean, but I find that again, it's the point of like, I feel like the higher powers in the arts, the people with all the money and the power, are sort of abusing the people at lower levels. You know, like.
Well, yeah, but it would be the same as if we think about museums because it's not, to me, it's not that dissimilar. If we think about a museum in the US where you have their curators, and then you have a new big patron that asks, oh, can you please come with me to Frieze? You're not going to say no. And then suddenly you became our consultant because you're helping that potential patron to see what kind of work they want to buy. And and help them through that process. And then once they become part of the patronage of that museum, you will, I mean, I can imagine that as a curator, you will be observing what kind of art your patrons are collecting.
I was going to say, it sounds like this job of an art consultant, right?
Yeah.
Art consultant and curator are almost overlapping a lot. Or potentially.
Well, in my career,
if you choose to let them overlap, they overlap easily.
Well, for me, yes. And that was the path that I decided to take because they do overlap, and also the knowledge that you gain from one, it helps you with the other.
Right.
As an art consultant, you're not tied to one gallery. So before, especially like the 80s, the 90s, the collectors, they would rely a lot on the galleries to be educated. But now there's such a massive number of galleries that you could be educated from that you might also want to keep your options open. So,
well, see, in the old days, the theory was that a curator, like the pinnacle of a career of a curator, was to work for an institution, a museum, let's say. So like that's what they did. But if they did that, they sort of couldn't do art consultancy because it was kind of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, so being a freelancer like you are allows for this overlap to really occur, and actually seems like an obvious thing to do as a freelancer in order to sort of have these side hustles that each of them lend to the intention of what you're trying to achieve. So like being an art consultant is opening certain doors and allowing for certain things to happen in your career, and being a curator are opening certain doors and allowing for certain things to happen, and doing both of them simultaneously are almost, it sounds like almost doing like exponentially more for you.
Definitely, yeah. And then I can do all the things that I want to do, which is dealing with artworks that I find interesting and people who are passionate about the collections, but also discovering young artists that I believe in and working with them and doing studio visits and creating a relationship. So yeah, for me it really works because I can do both. For the creator, the idea of the creator, the independent creator, really, it is a new model of sorts. And it is challenging because it's not so easy to find venues that agree with what you want to do and putting the works together.
Which actually lends to a question. Like, so you're a freelancer. I'm
Yes.
using air quotes for this, freelancer. Do you have to bid for exhibitions? Like, I mean, literally, like, do you do a proposal and then theoretically some other curator also puts in a proposal and you all are like getting into like a bidding war for who can do it for cheaper and this kind of stuff? Like, is this something that happens?
I never been on a bidding war with other curators, and I hope I'll never be.
Because it happens in other careers. I mean, like, I'm a photographer, and I've gotten jobs where like I offered to do it. I said, oh, this will be my price for it, and then they would say, oh, well, this other photographer will do it for this price, and then I had to adjust my price to. So I'm wondering, does that happen in the curatorial group?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Good,
because in that way, it's a lot it's like. For artists, it's not like, oh, so you want to offer your work for 8, but we have this other artist that is just like you and offers for 6. Like, no, it cannot be the same. That's impossible. For curatorial proposals, it's the same. What does happen is you might need to submit a proposal, and maybe because English is not my mother tongue, I do find writing a good way to put out my ideas in a very controlled and clear way.
You're very eloquent. You shouldn't be concerned. You're doing beautifully.
Thank you. But I do like the writing, so I always write proposals, and even for galleries or project spaces that have been invited to, I would still write a proposal and say, this is what you're expecting from it. Are you happy with this? But answering your question, not bidding wars, but proposals, open calls, and in that way, it's not that different from artists.
Right. So you and this is something I find fascinating. So you will sit back and there'll be an open call for curatorial things, and you'll sit back and you'll say, okay, well, I'm going to propose an exhibition for this space. Mm-hmm. Where do you even start to figure out what to propose?
Okay. Usually I think about the space. So the exhibition needs to be a response to the space, to the city, and to some kind of idea that is around us now. And why is that important? Why that exhibition now? Why this works at this given moment? So that's usually what I go for. So for example, the last show that I created in San Diego was called Parallel Screens, and it was somehow a response to the way that we consume moving image in our everyday lives that have been shifted from television, which is very passive, to almost an active way through YouTube, Netflix. We can control the way that we consume content, and it's always a one single channel.
Mm-hmm.
So I find fascinating how we can maybe go on YouTube and just skip from one video to another every 5 seconds. And at the same time, the same person, we sit and binge watch a TV show for 10 hours. I find that fascinating.
My wife does the skipping between videos, and I'm the binge watcher. Yeah.
And always depends on the content, but we do have a lot of control. And then when we think about the black box in the gallery, is the opposite. You have no control. You don't even know how long it is. You don't know if you're in the beginning or the end of it. And I wanted to do something that sort of it has a connection with those ideas. And the show was 2 screens, one in front of the other, 2 hours of content. And before every piece, you have, and always the same artist. And before every piece, you know the duration, the title. So in a way, it's easier to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
And you make a decision of, can I stay for the 2 hours? Or
am I willing to?
Yeah.
Are the chairs comfortable?
Yes, yeah. But anyway, it was a response to these ideas.
Okay, so when you're coming up with a proposal, so because I mean these are the kinds of questions like as an artist, I'm fascinated by like how do curators do this? Because like how can I basically get myself involved in some way, i.e. exhibiting? But do you start with well, it sounds like in that case you started with the medium, like you sort of knew you were working with moving images from the get-go on that. But in general, for your exhibitions, do you start with a concept? Do you start with a technicalities like a medium or a method of expression? Like what are the first thing you think about, second thing you think about, third thing you think about? Like, does it have an order? Is it?
No, it doesn't really. Okay. It doesn't really.
I keep looking for a system to the art world, and I keep getting told that there's no system.
No, there's no system. There's some questions that you need to answer, which is why now, why here, why with these people, and what is the connection? But yeah, and again, the curator I see as a facilitator. So you have to create some kind of not narrative, but connections with the works that sometimes is a very clear one. And that clear connection can become an entrance point for the visitors to get into the show, to something that is a little bit more loose on the theme. Because also as well, I can... one of my first surprises as a curator was that I was reading texts and philosophers, and I was looking at work that I was like, oh my God, this is so much has to do with these ideas by, I don't know, this feminist writer, Rebecca Sonnet. And the artist would be like, oh, I never heard about her. And,
yeah.
You know, and then you're like,
I get that all the time. People are constantly like, oh, this looks like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, nope, never heard of that.
Yeah. And as a creator, then, okay, so how do I create a narrative that is, that in a way the artist is not even the artist is familiar with? But there's no like set starting point.
Darn it. Okay. It's my Virgo in me. I want a system. I want it organized, and it's not.
What works for me is proposals that are 500 words. I think maybe that's
that's a good tip. Okay.
How do you get that? Because I think 500 words is a one pager, you know, and one pager people will read it. If
okay.
it is,
well, actually, which leads to, so we're going to wrap this up because I'm sure you've got other things to do, and I've got a train to get to. What kind of sort of advice through your own, potentially, like what it's funny, I keep asking people, like, give me some advice from either a positive experience you had, something that you feel like people don't understand or don't know that maybe you could sort of shed some light on, or some negative experience that you had that you could be like, stay away from this, don't do that, you know, whatever kind of thing for whoever. So this could be for potential curators, existing curators, artists, whatever, you know, whatever kind of experience you have, because the idea of this whole podcast is learning from your experiences.
Well, I think that is very important. It's very difficult to just be honest. If something's not working, verbalize before it becomes a problem. You don't have to agree with everything, but you have to be transparent. I think the more transparent you can be, the better it is. Because in the art world as well, there's a lot of relationships, but then you don't want to do a favor or make something expecting something out of it if it have not been verbalized. So if you invite, for example, a curator to come to your studio, because he's there, it doesn't mean that he will create a show and include you in it. But that means that he gave the first step towards maybe a relationship, and you have to nurture that. So if you ask for a curator, I have been in situations where, I had a studio visit, I gave feedback. It was a very harsh feedback. And to this day, the artist is, oh, when are you coming back to my studio? And I think, well, when you bloody make different work, when you listen to the things that I told you.
Right.
So is that old thing of, if you ask for some advice, be ready to take it. Otherwise, don't go through the trouble.
Excellent advice. Love it. All right. Last question. Have you listened to the podcast yet?
Yes.
The whole podcast? So you know the last question.
No, I don't know. I never heard the whole thing.
Okay, they're long. I know.
Yeah.
I understand. It's fine. I don't take offense. The final question I ask everybody, because the idea of the podcast is learning how the contemporary art world works, I decided to come up with a quantifiable result that I'm trying to achieve through the learning experiences that I'm having through these conversations.
Okay.
So that quantifiable outcome is that I'm asking everybody for advice on what I can do. So this is literally me as the proxy for everybody that's listening, but I will do this, and whatever you're about to tell me, I will actually do it. And I will include it in the podcast with complete transparency. Okay. Good, bad, embarrassment for me, doesn't matter. Everybody will be involved in it. I want your advice on a step that I can do to get a piece of my artwork on exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City.
Oh, wow. Okay. To get in MoMA.
You could easily equate it to Tate Modern or any other large institution is the idea. So like a good, top tier institutional museum. Just on exhibition. I don't need to be in the collection. Just one piece.
Okay.
So I'm not being selfish. I'm not saying solo show. I'm not saying anything like so one piece on exhibition.
Well, you need to get yourself into a collection by one of their patrons.
Excellent. That is something nobody has said yet.
And get the newest one, the youngest one.
That's excellent advice. Nobody had thought to go down that path yet, so that's good.
Cool.
I like that.
I hope that the patrons are not going to be angry at me. But yeah, because they are collectors. So if you get one of those collections, it's good to have someone inside that knows who you are.
Sexy. Yeah, I mean, everybody comes at it from a different angle. So like that's a unique angle that I had not heard yet.
Good.
Love it. Thank you very much for your time.
Welcome. My pleasure.